Hi guys, I thought I would spend some time today chatting with you about the topic of periodization, which is just another way of saying planning. And there are a number of things involved in this, but I wanted to specifically focus on how you solve the puzzle of needing to train more than one capacity at the same time. And some sports are more complex than others in this regard. Powerlifting is relatively simple. Maybe the simplest sport would be something like marathon running, where I'm not going to say there's only one capacity you need to develop, but it's kind of mostly an aerobic endurance kind of situation. So there is still periodization involved in something like that, but now, a sport like, for example, gymnastics or decathlon, in track and field would be much more complicated. But for the purposes of most people, and for my purposes, I would like to just focus in on the fact that we are trying to be bigger and stronger. Even if your only goal is to be stronger, for example, you might be a competitive powerlifter, you still need to worry about the development of muscle mass because that is a supportive adaptation to strength. So, all else being equal, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. So if you need to develop two capacities or more, there are two approaches that you could take toward that problem. The first is you could try to develop those capacities simultaneously. And by that, I don't necessarily mean literally simultaneously, and it doesn't even necessarily mean you're developing both within the same workout. But let's say within the context of any given week, you'll be developing those qualities. So, for example, a simultaneous approach could mean one day devoted to hypertrophy and another devoted to strength, or it could also mean you start off each workout working on strength, and then you finish the workout working on hypertrophy. Either of those would be a simultaneous approach. And as you might imagine, one big problem, or at least one concern with that approach, would be that since you're not devoting all your energy to one thing, you're not developing that one thing to as high a level as you could if you were to just completely focus on it. Another problem is that when you are working two capacities that are very different from each other, there might be what is called interference. So, for example, if you tried to develop maximum strength and aerobic capacity simultaneously, you're asking your body to adapt in 180-degree opposite directions, and so you really kind of end up with your body fighting against itself, trying to go two directions at once. So that's at least the concern. I'm not saying it's not solvable at all, but that's the concern. That's the downside of a simultaneous approach. So then the other way that you could try to tackle this program is through a sequential or a linear approach. And so that's why this video is titled Linear Periodization. What that means is for one period of time, which might be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, depends on a number of things, but for one phase of training, you might work on hypertrophy, and then you follow that up with a second phase of training, perhaps devoted to maximum strength development. And the theory on this, of course, is that because during the hypertrophy phase you focus mainly or exclusively on hypertrophy development, you can bring that capacity to a much higher level than if you were working on other things at the same time. In other words, it's kind of like if you're studying language. How far would you get studying French for 6 weeks if all you were doing was studying French versus if you were studying also Spanish and Italian at the same time? That's kind of the gist of the argument there. But there is at least a potential problem involved in a linear approach as well, which is that and using the example I just cited, if you are 3, 4, 5 weeks into the strength phase of training, you are 3, 4, 5 weeks away from working on hypertrophy development, and therefore the gains that you made during that hypertrophy phase are now starting to fade away due to inattention. So I've been looking into this though, and because of that criticism, or at least that potential concern on linear periodization, I've always been kind of not very convinced of it being terribly effective, and I've been a critic of it in the past. But as of late, I've been listening to some of the things that Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization has been putting out, and kind of going back to the works of Tudor Bompa and kind of rereading through some of his work. And one of the things that Dr. Israetel made a point about is that although you can lose a certain adaptation due to neglect, you can also reacquire it. So the way that you solve this problem in linear periodization is that you have kind of a reacquisition phase. So for example, you might spend a month on hypertrophy, and then 3 weeks on maximum strength, and then you might come back to hypertrophy for 2 weeks and kind of it's almost, if you can imagine, you know, the old circus trick where you're spinning plates on you have like these poles and you're spinning plates on top of the poles. When one plate is starting to slow down to the point where it might fall off the pole, you kind of re-energize it, right? Hopefully that makes sense. So I got to thinking about all this, and I got to thinking about the fact that I don't really have a lot of hypertrophy development. And so I'm kind of going to take this for a test drive. So for the month of March, I think I mentioned this in the last video, for the month of March I am working on hypertrophy primarily. Now, just so that you're not confused, you're watching me do singles on clean and jerks here. So that might sound like a contradiction, but I've got a weightlifting meet coming up, and these are not physically demanding singles. This is really sport practice for me. I'm working on timing and mobility and just technical things. These are not, you know, this is not even a strength development lift for me. This is 176 pounds, not a big deal. I'm not saying it's not easy. I'm not saying it's not hard for me. It is hard because I'm trying to execute these lifts in a certain way. But anyway, this is kind of like sport practice for me. I think I did 4 singles with 176 on the clean and jerk here. And then I moved to deadlifts and squats and back extensions, doing sets of 8 with those. So I just wanted to make that clear. We're not talking about these things in absolute purity necessarily. So that's what's going on here. So you can almost think of this as like an extended dynamic warm-up in a sense. And they do warm you up for deadlifts really kind of nicely. So those went pretty well, and was kind of happy with the clean and jerks on this particular session. And now you see me starting on deadlifts here. In the past, and as a matter of fact, last year I was working on a deadlift cycle that involved really hard sets of 5, and it just crushed me. So I was a little reticent to be doing high reps, you know, sets of 8 on the deadlift, but I figured I would go into this in a more gradual manner, and I'm going to work as hard as I can on these without crossing that certain line. I was joking with a client this morning that there's this line of, oh fuck, which is like you pick up a weight and it's just crushing you, and you're like, oh my god, I've got to do 7 more reps of this. So I didn't want to quite cross that line, and I'm performing these kind of like trying to think like a bodybuilder. I'm trying to keep certain joint angles, and I'm trying to keep the stress on the muscles. I'm just using a touch and go style. I'm trying to just go nice and light off the floor. I'm using straps. And so I ended up getting 315 for 8, which you're going to see right now, and then 2 sets of 8 with 365, and finished off with another set of 315. And I was kind of happy with how these went. And these are hard, but no big deal. You know, you guys who deadlift know that there are certain weights when you pick it up and you're slightly fearing for your safety. I wasn't really crossing that line with these. 365 is not a huge weight for me. So here's the first set of 2 on 365 for 8. And it's heavy, but no big deal. And I just have like a Velcro belt on. I don't have my powerlifting belt on. Wearing weightlifting shoes to increase the range of motion a little bit. So I'm just trying to work the muscle rather than worrying about what the weight is. And you know, the concern about I should mention this, the concern about doing 4 weeks almost exclusively dedicated to hypertrophy development is that you are going to be afraid that you're going to lose the strength that you developed previously. And you know, the fact is you are going to lose a little bit of strength. If you spend a month working on sets of 8, 9, and 10, your strength in the 1 to 3 range is not going to be where it was right off the bat. But the theory of this is, and the research seems to support this, is that then after a subsequent phase of training where you're working in the 3 to 5 rep range, you will end up at a higher point than you would have had you not done the hypertrophy phase prior to it. So this is kind of like base building, and you know, there's more than one reason to do phases like this. You know, in addition to hypertrophy development, you are laying a base. You know, you are kind of preparing to train hard. You're developing work capacity. You're developing some anaerobic endurance. And you know what, honestly, when you do a lot of heavy training, this is kind of a change of pace a little bit, so I think it's restorative. You're pumping a little more blood into the tissues than normal, so there's certainly more than one reason to do this above and beyond hypertrophy training. So it requires some patience, and it requires being okay with not being at maximum levels of strength all the time.
About 21, 22 seconds.
So in other words, it requires some ability to delay gratification, which was the subject of last week's video. So moved on to high box squats here, and just really, this is like my new favorite thing, just having that nice upright squat position and really working those quads. So really liking this and starting to feel like it's paying off in my lifting as well. So one last subject relating to me doing hypertrophy training is, this is where this requires a little bit of faith almost, but I don't know how much new muscle I can develop at age 55, and given the fact that I've trained for, I don't know, 25 years or something. So I don't know, but you know, something I always tell my new weight loss clients is, you know, I don't know how lean you can get. It's not as simple as just doing the right thing, because there are genetic constraints and individual constraints to how lean you can get. But what I can tell you is I can put you on the right path and tell you what to do to get as close to your potential as possible. So I'm trying to take my own advice here, and I am doing the things that have the most potential to develop my hypertrophy according to whatever my ultimate capacity might be. And we'll just see what happens. Because I've not done a lot of this kind of work in a sustained manner over the course of my lifting career, I'm kind of optimistic that I might experience some growth here. So that would be good. This is 205 on this, and then I think I did 1 or 2 sets with 225. Yep, like that squat a lot. It's not quite as shallow as I thought it was either. I mean, I'm not parallel, but it's not like a little quarter squat. It's kind of a real squat. So, yep, like that a bunch. Yep, so here's the 225 on this. This was a 2.5 hour workout, 35,000 pounds of volume. It's a lot. That's the most volume I've done in a session since I've started measuring this stuff consistently. And I'm narrating this 2 days afterwards, and I feel fine. I'm not sore. I'm not hurt, but just feel kind of flat and washed out. So, to be expected. I think I had one last drop-off set with 185 on this. Yep, that's the case. And then 3 sets of back extensions, so that was the workout. But even though this was a 2.5 hour workout, the first almost hour was those clean and jerks, and those were singles with 3-4 minutes rest, and that was just practice. So it was not really like I was lifting weights hard for 2.5 hours. And you should not fall prey to the idea that your work all has to be inside of 60 minutes or it's worthless. That's kind of silly. And of course, back extensions, which we do twice a week. And these are just real quick. 120 pounds, 3 sets of 12. So if you find this subject interesting, and or if you have questions, would love to get your comments, whether you're watching this on YouTube or elsewhere. Also would love to see you at my blog, targetfocusfitness.com. And I would love to have you sign up over there so that when we have new blog posts, we can kind of notify you about that. And here comes set number 2. You might notice that I don't put much effort into progressing this exercise like I do other exercises. And one is that this exercise, after a certain point, is just hard to add more weight to. I'm using 120 pounds as it is. The other thing is this is not like a real serious training target. This is kind of finished work. Posterior chain is a strength for me, so it's okay to just keep it on on maintenance level. So that's kind of why I'm not quite so adamant about pushing these numbers all the time. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope this was interesting for you. Again, leave your comments. And with any luck, I will see you again with another topic next week. Thanks a bunch.